The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Thick, cream-colored, with my name embossed in gold like it actually meant something. I almost didn't open it. For a moment, I just stared at it on the small, scratched desk in my apartment, the kind of desk you buy secondhand because rent eats everything else. I already knew who it was from. My father never did anything halfway. Even his invitations felt like statements. I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out the card. Heavy paper, expensive of course, a formal dinner. Saturday night, the Grand Meridian Hotel, and then at the bottom, in that familiar, sharp handwriting, "Don't embarrass me." I let out a quiet breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. Some things never change. Growing up, my father believed in two kinds of people, winners and disappointments. There was no middle ground, no room for trying, failing, or learning. You either had money, power, and recognition, or you were invisible. I had spent most of my life being invisible to him. "You think ideas pay bills," he once said when I told him I wanted to start my own business. "Dreams are for people who can't handle reality." That sentence stuck with me longer than I'd ever admit. While he built his empire, real estate, investments, partnerships with people whose names showed up in business magazines, I built slowly, quietly, without connections, without capital, without anyone clapping when I made progress. There were nights I questioned everything, nights I nearly quit, but I didn't, and still to him, I was the same failure. I placed the invitation back on the table and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Why now? Why invite me to a room full of people who measured worth in numbers I didn't yet have? It didn't feel like a gesture of reconciliation. It felt like a setup. I could already imagine the scene: crystal glasses, tailored suits, quiet judgment hiding behind polite smiles. And my father, at the center of it all, controlling the room like he always did. So why go? The answer came quickly, even if I didn't like it, because some part of me still wanted him to see me. Not the version of me he had already decided on, but the one I had fought to become. Saturday came faster than I expected. I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment, adjusting the only suit I owned. It wasn't designer, it didn't fit perfectly, but it was clean, pressed, and mine. For a second, doubt crept in. "You don't belong there," his voice echoed in my mind like it always did. I tightened my jaw and grabbed my keys. "Watch me," I muttered under my breath. The Grand Meridian Hotel was exactly what I imagined and worse. Valets in crisp uniforms. Marble floors that reflected the chandeliers above. The kind of place where even silence felt expensive. As I stepped inside, conversations hummed softly around me, the air filled with perfume, polished confidence, and the quiet clinking of glasses. I felt it instantly, that familiar pressure in my chest, not fear exactly, just awareness I was different from them. And they would know it. A hostess guided me toward the private dining hall, her polite smile never quite reaching her eyes. When she opened the doors, the sound of conversation swelled, then dipped, just slightly, as people noticed someone new entering. I stepped in anyway. The room was stunning. A long table set with precision, gold accents catching the light, and around it, men and women who looked like they had never doubted themselves a day in their lives. And at the head of the table, my father. He didn't stand to greet me. Of course he didn't. He simply looked up, his expression unreadable for a split second before settling into something colder. "Amusement. Well," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you actually came." A few guests turned curious. Some smiled politely, others didn't bother hiding their interest. I felt every pair of eyes in the room settle on me, measuring, comparing, judging. But I didn't look away. I was invited. I replied calmly, walking further into the room. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. Then it vanished. Let's hope, he said, leaning back in his chair. You behave like it. A soft ripple of laughter moved through the table. I pulled out an empty chair and sat down, ignoring the heat rising in my chest. This wasn't new. This was how it had always been. But something felt different tonight. I couldn't explain it yet, but beneath the tension, beneath the weight of old words and older wounds, there was something else building. Something quiet. Something patient. And as I glanced around the table, I noticed one man who wasn't laughing. He was watching, carefully, like he already knew something the rest of the room didn't. I didn't know it yet, but that look would change everything. The first course arrived like a performance, perfectly plated, delicately arranged, and served with the kind of precision that made you afraid to touch it. Conversations flowed easily around the table, smooth and rehearsed, like everyone had practiced being impressive their entire lives. I kept my movements calm, controlled. Fork, knife, small bite, nod when appropriate, blend in, that was the plan. But my father had never been interested in letting me blend in. So, he said suddenly, swirling the wine in his glass, his voice cutting cleanly through the room, "Tell us, what is it you're doing these days?" The question sounded harmless, casual even. It wasn't. I felt the shift immediately. Conversations slowed. A few people leaned in just slightly, curiosity sharpening their attention. I set my fork down gently. "I'm working on building something of my own." A pause, something, he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's a very flexible description." A few quiet chuckles followed. I ignored them. "It's still growing." "Ah," he said, nodding slowly, like he was humoring a child. "Still growing, that's one way to put it." The man sitting across from me smirked into his glass. Someone to my left adjusted her posture, clearly entertained. I felt the familiar pressure building in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. He wasn't done. "You know," my father continued, leaning forward slightly, "when I was your age, I had already closed my third major deal." There it was. The comparison. I didn't have the luxury of figuring things out. I had results. Another ripple of laughter. This time louder. I could feel it now, the room settling into a rhythm. His rhythm, and I was the punchline. "I'm not trying to follow your path," I said, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my throat. That got his attention. He tilted his head slightly, studying me like I'd just said something mildly amusing. "No," he said, "you're not following any path. That seems to be the issue." The words landed harder than I expected. For a split second, I saw it all again, the nights I worked until sunrise while everyone else slept. The rejections, the failed attempts, the moments I almost gave up. None of that existed in his version of me. To him, I was still the same person who never finished anything, the same person who wouldn't make it. He leaned back in his chair, lifting his glass as if preparing for a toast. "Let me be honest," he said, his voice smooth but sharp underneath. "I've always believed in facing reality, and the reality is," he looked directly at me now, no disguise, no subtlety, "you'll never make a dime." The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. A few people laughed, some awkwardly, others a little too comfortably. One man actually shook his head as if agreeing. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even blink. Inside, something twisted, but it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't just hurt, it was clarity, because suddenly I understood something I hadn't fully accepted until now. He didn't say those words because they were true. He said them because he needed them to be true. Because if I ever proved him wrong, everything he believed about control, success, and worth would crack. And he couldn't allow that, so serious. He added with a faint smirk, noticing my silence. Come on, lighten up. We're just having dinner. More laughter. I picked up my glass of water and took a slow sip, buying myself a second not to recover, but to decide. I could react, defend myself, argue, prove a point, but that's exactly what he wanted, a reaction, a scene, a confirmation that I didn't belong in this room. So instead I did nothing. I set the glass down carefully and gave a small nod, as if I had just heard a passing comment. Noted, I said simply. The word caught him off guard, just for a second. His eyes narrowed slightly, like he was trying to figure out why I wasn't playing my role. Why I wasn't breaking. The conversation slowly picked back up around us, but something had changed. The laughter felt thinner now, less certain, and that's when I noticed him again, the man sitting 2 seats away from my father, the one who hadn't laughed before. He still wasn't laughing. In fact, he hadn't said a word since the dinner began. He was watching me. Not with judgment, not with amusement, but with something else entirely. Interest. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave the slightest nod. It was subtle, so subtle no one else would have noticed, but I did. And for the first time that night, I felt it clearly. This wasn't over, not even close. Because while my father thought he had already defined the ending of my story, someone else at this table was just starting to read it. Dessert was being served when the shift finally happened. By then, the room had settled back into its polished rhythm, laughter rising and falling, deals hinted at between sips of wine, reputations quietly reinforced with every confident word. If someone had walked in at that moment, they'd never guess anything uncomfortable had occurred earlier. But I could still feel it, that sentence, "You'll never make a dime." It echoed faintly in the back of my mind, not as a wound anymore, but as something colder. Sharper fuel. I hadn't said much since. A few polite responses, a nod here and there. I let the room forget about me. Or at least I let them think they had, because across the table he hadn't forgotten. My father's business partner. He finally set his fork down with a quiet, deliberate motion. It was small, but it cut through the noise more effectively than any raised voice could have. Conversation slowed, then stopped. He stood, every head turned toward him. Now, this man wasn't just another guest. You could feel it in the way the room shifted, the way people instinctively straightened, the way even my father's posture changed, just slightly, but enough to notice. Power recognizes power, and this man had it. I think. He began, his voice calm but carrying easily across the table. We've overlooked something tonight. My father gave a faint smile, clearly expecting agreement. Have we? Yes, the partner replied, his gaze moving. Not to my father, but to me. The room followed his eyes, and suddenly I was no longer invisible. I've been listening. He continued, and I find it interesting how quickly conclusions are drawn. There was no humor in his tone. No softness either, just precision. My father let out a small chuckle. If you're referring to my son, I assure you, I know him well enough to draw conclusions. The partner didn't respond immediately. He took a slow sip of his drink, then set the glass down carefully, as if placing the next piece on a board only he could see. Do you? He asked quietly. The question landed heavier than any insult. A flicker of irritation crossed my father's face. I think a father has that right. A father has proximity, the partner said, not necessarily understanding. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the direction anyone expected. My father's smile thinned. I'm not sure what point you're trying to make. The partner turned fully toward him now. My point, he said, is that dismissing someone's potential in a room full of opportunity isn't just unkind. He paused. It's bad business. Silence. You could feel it, tight, electric, waiting. My father leaned back slightly, his confidence returning, though not as solid as before. With all due respect, I don't make business decisions based on potential. I deal in results. And what if the results exist? The partner replied smoothly, but you've chosen not to see them. That landed hard. For the first time that night, my father didn't have an immediate response. The partner turned his attention back to me. Tell me, he said, his tone shifting, still serious, but now direct, focused. Your project, how long have you been building it? I hesitated for half a second, not out of fear, but because I understood what was happening. This wasn't casual curiosity. This was an opening. 2 years, I said, and in those 2 years, I met his gaze. I failed more times than I can count, learned faster than I expected, and built something that's starting to work. A few eyebrows lifted around the table. My father scoffed lightly. Starting to work is a generous way of saying. It generated 6 figures in its first real quarter. The words came out steady. Clear, undeniable. The room went completely still. No laughter this time, no whispers, just silence. My father blinked, the reaction so quick most people might have missed it. But I didn't, because I had never seen him caught off guard before. Someone muttered quietly, but didn't finish the sentence. The partner nodded once, as if confirming something he already knew. Yes, he said, almost to himself. That's what I thought. My father's expression hardened. If that were true, I would have known. The partner glanced at him, and for the first time there was something close to a smile, but it wasn't friendly. That, he said, is exactly the problem. A ripple moved through the room, not laughter, not quite shock, but something in between. Recognition. The balance had shifted, and everyone could feel it. The partner straightened slightly, his voice calm but decisive. I've reviewed the numbers, he said, quietly impressive, efficient growth, no outside backing. He looked at me again. That kind of discipline is rare. I didn't respond, didn't need to, because the message wasn't just for me. It was for everyone at that table, including my father, I believe. The partner continued, we may have been looking at the wrong person tonight. That was it. The moment everything changed, the same room that had laughed at me less than an hour ago now saw something else. Not a failure, not a disappointment, but a possibility, and my father, for the first time in my life, had nothing to say. Silence has a weight to it. I had never truly understood that until that moment. The same room that once echoed with laughter at my expense was now completely still. Like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. My father didn't move, didn't speak. For a man who built his life on control, on always having the final word, the silence around him felt unnatural. Fragile, I could see it in his eyes now. That flicker of calculation, of disbelief. He was trying to piece it together, trying to decide whether to dismiss it, challenge it, or pretend it didn't matter. But the problem was it already did. The partner had shifted the entire room with a few carefully chosen words. Not loudly, not dramatically, just precisely, and now everyone was looking at me differently, not with pity, not with amusement, but with attention, real attention, the kind I had chased for years without ever admitting it. The partner turned slightly toward me again, his expression calm but expectant. Would you like to elaborate? He asked. It wasn't a command, it was an invitation. I could feel it, the moment sitting right in front of me. This was where I could say everything I had held back, every insult, every dismissal, every time my father made me feel small. I could throw it all back at him, expose him, embarrass him the way he had embarrassed me, and for a brief second I wanted to. Badly, but then something unexpected happened. That anger, the one I carried for years, didn't rise the way I thought it would. It didn't control me. Because I realized something simple, something that hit deeper than any revenge ever could. I didn't need his approval anymore. And I definitely didn't need his humiliation to prove my worth. So instead of reacting, I stood up slowly. The movement alone drew every eye in the room. I straightened my jacket, not to impress them, but to steady myself, and looked directly at my father. Then at the rest of the table. I didn't come here to prove anything, I said, my voice calm, clear, and unwavering. And I didn't come here to argue. No one interrupted. I came because I thought maybe just once things could be different. A small pause. They're not. The words weren't angry, they were final. I let that settle before continuing, but that's okay. I glanced at the partner briefly, then back at the room. Because while I was busy being told what I couldn't do, I was building something anyway. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't rush, every word landed exactly where it needed to. I failed, a lot, more than anyone here probably knows, but I kept going. Not because someone believed in me. I looked at my father again. But because I decided I didn't need them to. That one hit, I saw it. Just a slight shift in his expression, but it was there. For the first time, he wasn't looking at me like a disappointment. He was looking at me like he didn't recognize me at all. Good, I'm not here to ask for validation. I continued, and I'm not here to compete with anyone at this table. I let out a small breath. I'm here because I built something that works, and whether it makes a dime or a million, it's mine. The silence that followed felt different now. Not tense, respectful. I turned slightly toward the partner, and I appreciate being seen, I said, but I don't need saving. A faint smile touched his lips, almost approving. That's exactly why you're worth investing in, he replied. A quiet murmur moved through the room again, but this time it wasn't doubt. It was interest. Real, undeniable interest. The partner stepped forward slightly, his tone now firm, public. I'd like to discuss a potential collaboration, he said. If you're open to it. There it was, not a favor, not sympathy, an opportunity earned. I nodded once. I'm open to conversations, professional, measured, equal. The balance had completely shifted now, and my father knew it. I looked at him one last time, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with something far more powerful. Closure, you once told me I'd never make a dime, I said quietly. He didn't respond, couldn't. I gave a small nod. I guess we'll both have to live with what we believed. And just like that, I stepped away from the table. No dramatic exit, no slammed doors, just a calm, steady walk toward the life I had built without him. Behind me, the room slowly came back to life, but it didn't sound the same anymore, because something had changed. Not just in their eyes, but in mine. I didn't walk out feeling like I had won. I walked out knowing I never needed to fight in the first place.